You're listening to The Collectors, a short story by Stu Jones, narrated by the author. She wasn't coming back to him. He was sure of it this time. He finished up supper and cleaned the crude wooden plate and cup in the basin of murky dishwater. Wiping his arm across his brow, he dried his rough hands on a scrap of cloth worn thin. Below the counter, the dark eyes of his companion hovered over poised jaws that clicked and salivated. He huffed and brushed a few fat clippings from the counter with the back of his hand. They'd only just cleared the edge of the wood when the beast's snapping jaws claimed them. It drooled and shuffled ever closer against his leg. He grunted and pointed to the creature's place, found its hesitation annoying. A barked curse saw it slink away to its bedding by a fire near the end of its life. With a groan, the beast turned in 2 circles, then plopped down onto the old cushion, dark eyes glistening in the light of the dying flames. With meticulous precision, he wiped down the long wooden counter and basin area before carrying the basin itself to the back door. He engaged the latch with his knee and nudged the door open. The hinges squalled. He felt the cold air sting his face as he slung the dirty water from the basin out into the yard. The heavy wooden door protested shut under the labor of its own weight. Long overdue for a good oiling, he thought. On the other side of the room, the domesticated beast tracked his movements across the small space, curious eyes gleaming like embers. Next to his own bed, he stopped. Out from a few of his meager belongings, he pulled out a piece of pressed parchment and a charcoal pencil. At the desk next to the fire pit, he turned up the firebox in its case. Setting the parchment down, he carefully ran his flattened hands across the face a few times to get it smoothed out. He took a deep breath and sat. The crude pencil in his fingers scratched against the parchment. My dearest love, my heart yearns in my breast. I thought we could make it. I thought you'd come to understand me, that you'd seen how hard I tried to keep from the drink this time. Come back to me. He stopped and set the pencil down, reached down beside the desk, and picked up the ceramic jug that contained his hard work. So easy to get lost in those depths. He set it to his lips and took a long, hard pull. The cool liquid sloshed a fiery path down into his belly. He wiped the sleeve of his shirt across his mouth to catch a bit of dribble that slid across his chin. He was no fool. He hadn't written her before. Why should he start now? She wouldn't keep an open mind. Couldn't see that he'd tried to stop. Even if he wrote this stupid letter, she'd never see it. She was gone. Snatching the paper up from the desk, he swore and clamped it tight in a furious fist. From its place in front of the fire, his companion raised its head, eyes questioning. The hermit took another long pull from the jug as he flung the crumpled parchment into the fire. He watched it shrivel and coil. Nothing left for him now. He'd tried to start over, and it blew up in his face. Thought she was just angry that she'd come back to him from the cold, dark night. She hadn't, and 2 weeks passed since. The fire burned down to coals, the last gasps casting strange, dancing shadows across the length of the cabin. He could disappear out here in this barren frontier land, and no one would care. The grip of the drink lay heavy upon him. He felt the room twist and had just enough presence of mind to sit back into the shallow bed and kick off his slippers. Then, slumping over onto the cot, He let out a bloated sigh. It was everything he deserved, all that remained of his own personal hell. Beneath a moonless night, the pealing crack of thunder across the open expanse of the heavens would not have woken him, but the blinding flash did. It seared its way through his eyelids, the glare a window of light in his mind. He sat upright on his bed and rubbed at his face. His companion gave a low growl and raised its head up off his pallet. Just a little thunder. No reason for alarm, he thought. Except he heard something else now. A distant whine, high-pitched and odd. The sound moved across the dark landscape with an unearthly vibration. After a moment, silence. He placed his hands against his head, the drink still upon him. Stepping over his shoes, he stood at the window. The black landscape revealed nothing. He peered out, straining. Beyond the cold, crude glass, nothing moved in the stillness. He looked up to see the dark, distant, starry sky. The cold depths of the heavenly expanse filled his eyes. Thunder always meant storm clouds this time of year. So where are they? He thought. His companion growled again, low and agitated. Turning, the farmer moved to the other window to have a look. As he looked toward the sky, he saw it. The faintest glow along the horizon. Flames. No, different in tone and structure than flickering flames or the rising of the light. He watched as it pulsated against the dark horizon. White, artificial, alien. A creeping sensation covered his skin. There'd been reports, sightings. Folks in these parts saw strange things in the mountains, such unexplainable things, streaks of flame in the midnight sky, lights and sounds. Some said spirits haunted the land. Others he encountered in town used another word. He'd laughed at them, and they'd returned mannequin-like stares. Forgetting his simple leather foot coverings, he went straight for the heavy wooden door and unbolted it. Felt the uncomfortable wash of cold as the air moved over his exposed skin. He stared at the glowing light and listened to the mechanical hum from over the ridge. He turned and hissed at the beast across the room, still on its bedding. It regarded him with wary eyes, not wanting the cold. The animal rose and came to him when he hissed a second time and stomped his foot. The hermit pointed up the hill and snatched the door open just enough for the animal to squeeze through. Growling, the beast tore off into the icy dark, hungry, searching. It bounded up and over the rise, out of sight. A shriek of fear, unlike anything he'd ever heard, caused a chill to streak up his spine. Amidst the strange sounds, he could still hear the beast's wild and furious baying. It had encountered something up there. Someone, fooling around, likely. He grunted, shrugged off the fear. His companion was a big boy. The beast would leave its mark, and the trespassers, well, they'd learn not to come near his place again. As he returned to the door, a flash lit the sky from over the hill. The snapped sound of lightning followed. His companion screamed, a blood-curdling sound that made the hermit shrink back. A terrible quiet followed. Nothing but the glow and the hum of the distant thing. The hermit called into the night, summoned his companion back to him. Silence. He stumbled back, bumped the heavy door, and shoved it open with his shoulder. The dry hinges squalled, and he cursed himself for not oiling it. He turned, bolted the door again. His heart rattled like a caged animal in his chest. He glanced out the window and saw a figure climb into view, silhouetted against the dim light of the horizon. He blinked, rubbed his eyes hard, refusing to trust them, and looked again. Now there were 2, 4 of them. Their strange, spindly forms slid across the ridge with an eerie grace. Moving down the hillside now, moving towards him. He dropped to his hands and knees in the dark of his cottage, ignored the pain in his joints, the knock of wood against bone. They were close, not further than 100 strides. Maybe they hadn't seen him. Maybe they didn't know his little place was out here nestled in the silent dark. What could they want? Am I crazy? He thought. For a while he lay in the quiet. After a time, he pinched his fingertips on the windowsill and raised his face back up towards the window, but fear paralyzed him. He had to prove to himself it was a lie, but the icy chill of the unknown slid down his spine and froze him in with terror. What if the figures were real, and something really was out there? He had to know. He rose fast, wanting only to get it over with. His face flew up into the window, eyes wide, mouth agape. A strange, childlike shriek spilled from his throat as he came nose to nose with the very thing he hoped he would not see. The long, featureless face, set against the pale white of its flesh, stared back at him from the other side of the glass. He fell away from the window and struck his head against the ground. A flash of stars danced in his eyes. He crawled, desperate now, digging his fingers into the planks of the floor. The thing was trying to open the door, shaking it, slamming against it. A groan escaped him. He scrambled to the far wall, grabbed the first thing he could put his hands on. A large iron skillet curved like a great handled bowl. His other hand slid up the wall to secure a hold on his father's weathered hand axe, badly in need of sharpening. Terror swelled inside him as the door splintered and gave way. The crackling sounds of thunder filled the air. He pinched his eyes, held the skillet up like a shield, and charged forward, a scream in his throat. Lightning cracked, and he felt the hot sting of fire ride his leg. He swung down, hard, and the axe struck true, sunk deep into the skull of the intruder. A long breath of exhaled air passed across his face. He pulled the axe free and struck again, and again, until the creature quivered at his feet. His chest heaved, and for the first time, he realized just how small the thing was. He was twice as large as this strange, slick-skinned thing. Though size seemed to matter little against weapons like this lightning rod, he looked at the bizarre L-shaped device that burned him. He swung his axe down and destroyed it with a single blow, and sparks jumped across the floor of his cabin. One last look at the creature's blank face, now cleaved open and gushing its contents upon the floor. He knew one thing with certainty. He had to get clear of the cottage. The others were coming. From the safety of an elevated rock outcropping, he watched as they tore his simple cabin apart. Angry at the death of one of their own, the huffing and screaming echoed across the valley. He cringed at each alien shriek. The strange sounds caused bugs to run wild across the bare flesh of his neck. But the shock in him wore thin. These things had come here, to his land. If he ever wanted to tell another living soul about what happened here, he would have to survive. He could not be just another of the missing, relegated to a faded picture, a small patch of bare wall behind the counter of the local store. Maybe if he could get to the road and make his way towards town. But no, that wouldn't work. I'll never make it with my leg like this, he thought. He looked down at the seared burn where the lightning rod tore through his trousers, the charred skin of his thigh exposed. A terrible ache radiated from the wound. Whatever these alien creatures were, they wielded magic like a spellcaster, able to throw lightning bolts like the ancient gods. He would not make it to town on foot, not against weapons like that, and to boot, they had a motorized carriage of some kind. They grinded and hummed in it and bounced down the barren landscape. He watched them come, and it moved much faster than he could run. They would most certainly run him down if he made a break for the road, hobbled as he was. He watched in silence, counting the shiny, white-skinned figures. 4 of them he could see. They talked to each other now in clipped, distressed tones, losing interest in the cabin. They spread out, searching. He could feel the fear in his chest again, the feeling like he wouldn't see the rising of the morning light. He swallowed it back. They wanted revenge for the dead one, but they didn't know the terrain, not the way he did. Hobbling on his wounded leg, he crouched low beneath the probing light of their torches. He moved, flanking the group that fanned out to find him in the darkness. He couldn't take them all on at once, but maybe he could get the better of them one at a time. Crouched in the dark, on a rock-covered outcropping, he waited. In the silent, wind-swept black they came, shuffling, their leathery, pearl-colored skin glistening. They separated from each other as they spread out in search of him. He could still hear them, speaking, muffled and quick, communicating at a distance with each other by way of some sorcery. As one of them moved beneath him, he looked one last time at the weeping burn on his thigh. If he took a direct hit, it might be the end of him. He needed to move with perfect silence. Without taking time to reconsider, he shoved from the ledge. Dropping through the night, he swung the hand axe and landed a true strike against his foe. Another whoosh as the axe sunk deep into the chest of the creature. A wet, gurgling sound. He pulled it to the ground, and the thing struggled in his grasp. He struck again and again at the creature's neck until the head came free. In an instant, all movement ceased, save for the twitching of its feet. He grunted. Maybe they weren't that different after all. Like all creatures he knew of, remove the head, and life ends. He looked at the chest wound of the creature, pushed his fingers close, and felt the slightest rushing of air, like a breeze coming from the wound. A creature filled with wind. He raised his head and scanned the sky, the surrounding terrain. For now, the others remained oblivious. His fingers touched at the gooey splotches of color stuck to the fabric of his tunic, remnants of the thing. He reveled in the damage he dealt, and how fast he'd done it. He was no warrior. He worked the land with his hands, just as his father had. And yet, here, he'd slayed these creatures with little effort. He was bigger and stronger than they. In fact, if it were not for their magic weapons, he might have the upper hand. The flickering torches grew further away as they searched up the hillside. It would not be long until they followed his tracks around to this place, and with it, a second body. He had to think of a way to stop the rest of them for good. A blossom of hope grew in his chest. Their carriage. They left it at the cottage. Moving silent as death itself, he slunk back the way he came, limping amongst the foreboding boulders and twisted stick brush of the dark landscape. Through the broken windows, he could see the contents of his meager home, broken and scattered. ruined. He would have to be quick. He ducked into the darkened interior of his home, and the bitter cold clung to him amidst the dying warmth. He rummaged around for his poncho, and shrugging into it, he grabbed an extra shirt and 2 large jugs of moonshine from the cabinet before moving to the corner where he retrieved his hunting javelin. He took a bowl from the counter, swabbed it out with the shirt, and dug it into the still hot coals of the fire, there trapping a handful of embers. He exited the cottage and pulled the stopper from the jug. He shook his head with regret, took a long pull, and sloshed it into the open top of the alien machine. The second bottle followed, soaking the carriage with its potent contents. Wrapping the end of his javelin with a strip of cloth from his shirt, he tied it tight and dredged it in a puddle of the alcohol. A flash of light blinded his eyes. He ducked instinctively as a lightning bolt snapped over his head into a nearby boulder. Into the dark he ran, forgetting his plan, until he heard the machine start up. He jammed the end of the javelin into the bowl as he ran, and the coals ignited the alcohol-soaked cloth with a poof. He spun, heard the confused screams of the creatures. With perfect form, the javelin loosed from his hand and soared across the sky, led by its flaming tip. One of the 4 creatures leapt from the buggy as the javelin struck it with a stunning flash of fire. They shrieked, pulling at their skins even as they melted into the inferno. Through the fire and the flames, he watched the last survivor run away through the dark. An exhausted sigh escaped his trembling lips. He took up his hand axe and trudged on towards the humming white glow beyond the ridge. He could not allow them to escape, only to return with an extermination force. It had to end now. Every last one of them must die. There's nothing left for me now that she's gone, he thought. But that wasn't entirely true. He looked at his hands, questioned them. Why are you so eager to fight these invaders, he thought. Somewhere deep inside him he already knew. He wasn't ready for the long sleep. Not yet. Something remained unanswered. She was my great love. Why did she leave me? He had to live, if only to see her one last time, to know why. The humming of the impressive vessel increased as the magic that powered it grew stronger, louder. He flicked his eyes up to see the last pearly-skinned creature scramble inside. He could let it go. He hated the killing. Just let it fly back to the fathomless stars from whence it came. But they would not let this stand. They would be back. They'd come for him, or another of his people, unless he stopped them. Here. Now. He vaulted down the rocky hillside, moving towards the great airship with purpose. Whirling circles of light grew inside it, blasting the dust from the ground. The mouth-like opening hissed as it closed. With a press from its powerful legs, he leapt to the rim and scrambled inside. Ducking in the smallish interior, the corridor glowed with a strange pale light. Cold, sterile, the surfaces glinting and smooth, the rails polished, the floor hard and alien. He looked around, aghast. He knew he should search for the last creature, but now he was out of his element and no longer held the advantage. Crouching low, he made his way down the corridor. In the chamber ahead, he saw them, bathed in the strange white glow of the place. Row upon row of crystal prisons, they housed all manner of dead creatures. Some he recognized as animals he had hunted. Others, more bizarre, maybe came from other lands, far away. They were part of some terrible collection He attempted to shake the pale specimens from his head, turned to leave, when his eyes took in the crystal prison at the end of the row. His body locked in place. Fear and recognition swarmed through him. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. He tried to swallow back the swell of nausea. There she was, beautiful, just as he remembered her, except for the fatal burn straight through the center of her torso. She hovered in some sort of awful suspended animation, eyes wide, mouth still yawning in a silent scream.
No.
He moaned and touched the crystal,
Not you.
thick and cold and dead. She never left him. They took her from him. They took her. He couldn't stop the scream, the ugly sound of madness as it tore from the depths of his soul. He shrieked again, clawed at his face, at the glass. The cold vessel shifted below him and began to rise. He could hear them coming now, yelling as they came. The first blast missed him, shattered one of the crystal cages. The hair across his body stood on end. As he turned, he saw the poor savaged creature tumble out of the case onto the floor. They'd manipulated it, experimented on it. They would not do the same to her. The second blast struck him solidly and would have flung him back if it weren't for his momentum. Again and again the lightning cracked and he felt it sear burning holes in his flesh. Wild with fury, he descended upon them, and their screams rang in his ears. Their mouths sang strange incantations of fear and death, but it did not stop him as he mangled their bodies and reformed their skulls against the cold, lifeless floor of this alien hell. The great ship shifted and rose further, leaving. He could not allow it. Huffing, gasping, he ran down the corridor and into the open space where the last creature sat strapped to its seat. It did not try to stand nor fight. It only squawked like a trapped animal, awaiting the death blow of the hunter. For an instant, he stood over it, reveling in the moment. It shrieked into its little black box one last time. With a savage downward blow of the axe, the creature lay dying, clutching at its mortal wound. Without further thought, he turned and swung the axe down again and saw the steering column of the strange machine obliterated in a single blow. The great ship shuddered. With a howl, he struck at the blinking lights again and again, and the floor of the world fell away beneath him. He awoke to an odd gurgling sound, the rasping of his own breath foreign to his ears as his lungs filled with fluid and blood. He didn't have long. He had to find her. Stomping, dizzy through the wreckage, he tossed aside fragments of ship and junk and searched through many cases of shattered, bizarre artifacts until he found her. And when he did, he took his hand and gently slid it across her face to close her eyes, then scooped her in his arms and gazed down at her now peaceful face with sorrow and regret. He turned to get clear of the burning wreckage, carrying his love. He hoped he would not succumb to his wounds. Not yet. A strange sound drew his attention. The sound of voices. Nearing the sound, he saw it was one of the magical black boxes. He could not understand the strange squawking that emanated from it, but he listened anyway. Houston to Valhalla 14, do you copy? Houston to Valhalla 14, confirm. Hostile alien organism encountered on Vexus 782. Multiple casualties. Mission abort. Houston to Valhalla 14, do you copy? He wheezed, shook his head at the alien incantations. A heavy stomp of his calloused foot crushed the black box into the dirt. These intruders, these thieves had reaped their just rewards. They took her from him, but they could not keep her from him. He would carry her up into the hills, to where the northern lights would shine upon the beauty of her face, to the place where the rest of his lineage lay entombed. And there, beneath the cold dark of the heavens, they could rest together for a spell. This has been a reading of The Collectors by Stu Jones, narrated by the author. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to encourage the creation of more content. Thanks for listening.